My name is Lynn and I am studying to become a BCBA. In today's video, we are covering Unit 7 of the first course that I took, which is Intro to Motivating Operations. Now, Unit 7 was the hardest unit in my opinion because it was so technically heavy. So in this video, I'm going to go over very specific examples of each motivating operation consequence that I have for it. So because of that, we're going to cover the four-term contingency, the basic four-term contingency, and then all types of the motivating operations according to their consequences. And we're going to cover all 8 consequences and examples of thereof. So basically, what it's describing is a motivating operation. It starts with an antecedent effect on the behavior. That is to say that there is something that starts in the beginning that has a direct evocative or abative effect. Evocative means that it kind of brings it out, and abative means it kind of pulls it back. So if a behavior is evoked, like the person wants to do something, versus if it's abated, they'll want to not do it, right? So the basic 4-term contingency is the motivating operation, the SD, the response, really, the behavior to that SD. And then finally, the consequence. And that would be either SR plus or minus or SP plus or minus. SR just means reinforcer and P means punisher. And plus or minus means you either something was added in the environment or removed in the environment. So remember, plus or minus or positive and negative within the world of ABA directly means or is describing the integer thereof. So are you adding something to an environment or are you removing something to the environment? So plus or minus, not like good or bad, like everyone tends to get them confused as. That being said, there is an establishing operation and an abolishing operation. An establishing operation increases the value of a consequence. So an establishing operation, the most common example is provided is usually describing deprivation. So you haven't had food in a day. So you now have an established operation of food being a reinforcer because you have been deprived of that. So suddenly the value of food goes up. So that directly affected the value of the consequence. An abolishing operation is the exact opposite, where let's say you just came back from a buffet. Suddenly if someone says, hey, if you run a mile with me, I'll give you a gigantic cake or something like that. Well, you've already eaten. So the value of that cake has been abolished because you've already been satiated. So it decreases the value of a consequence. It's really important to note that both the establishing and abolishing operations are generally momentary. They have a momentary effect on the dimensions of behavior because after you eat, well, it's not like you only eat once a week, right? Or at least you shouldn't. You will eventually want to eat again. So the establishing and abolishing operations vary as time goes on. So they're all momentary effects. There are 2 main variables upon establishing and abolishing operations: if they're available and how valuable they are. So establishing and abolishing discuss the value, but availability also has a huge effect. If you're starving and someone says, give me 50 jumping jacks, and you're like, okay, what do I get in return? Well, I would have a great meal for you, but I don't have an ability to get it right now. Well, that's not really gonna do anything. You're not gonna do the 50 jumping jacks just because you understand that the consequence or the reinforcer that they want to provide is not available, right? So availability has a huge impact, and that's where discrimination comes in. You can discriminate between when something's available and when something isn't. So if I'm sitting in my living room, I'm not going to ask for sushi when I'm hungry. But if I'm sitting at a Japanese restaurant, I understand that this is the environment of which sushi is available. So I will ask. So I've discriminated between my living room environment and the Japanese restaurant environment, right? So availability and value. If I've already eaten at a buffet and I show up at a Japanese restaurant, probably not going to ask for sushi, even though I'm in the environment that says, hey, it's available to you. So once again, it all has a direct effect on the value and availability. Or I should say, value and availability have a direct effect on your behavior to either get something or not get something, right? So motivation is described as the effectiveness on a behavior by the value of its consequence. So the establishing operations will describe the motivating factors, right? So there's a term in motivation called provenance, which describes the value altering effect as a result of genetics. So that is to say something that's unlearned that is reinforcing or motivating essentially for us. It doesn't necessarily have to be reinforcing. So things like sleep deprivation, hunger, sex, basic genetic unlearned items that we need for our bodies to survive, those all have motivating provenance. So it's important to understand that those have phylogenic value to them, which means that they're unlearned, versus ontogenic. And ontogenic means that they're learned. So things like praise or just conditioned overall reinforcement, or any sort of providing of, like, when someone claps their hands or says, yay, good for you, we've learned, right, that those are good. So we have learned to want those items. Same thing with toys. Toys are not actually, like, we're not genetically predisposed to toys. We learn that they are fun over experience. That being said, there are 8 types of motivating operations according to their consequences. So as you know, we have establishing operations, which are EO, and then we have abolishing operations, which are AO. With that being said, there's 4 types of EOs and 4 types of AOs, and they each have a different effect on value of consequence towards a behavior. So for instance, the first one is EOSR+, which means the establishing operation is you haven't had water. SR plus means there's a reinforcement to be had by something added to the environment. So you haven't had water, so now you're going to add water. You're going to have water in a cup in your environment, and that is, it's established that that is valuable. So EOSR plus is you can be reinforced by positive reinforcement because you have been deprived of something, essentially. That's one main example of it. The next one is EOSR minus. So that is to say that there's sun in your eyes, right? Let's say you're driving and the sun suddenly comes into your eyes. Well, now you want to block the sun. So you either put the visor down or you put your sunglasses on. So the establishing operation is something uncomfortable has come into your environment, and the reinforcing factor would be to remove that uncomfortable item. So EOSR minus is you're going to remove whatever's uncomfortable in your environment. So that is sun in your eyes, you block it. EOSP, so remember P is punishment, where R is reinforcement, which increases behavior. P is anything that would decrease behavior. EOSP would be, for example, let's say you broke your hand and then you're cooking and you have to squeeze a lemon to like add to your dish. Well, your broken hand has established, EO, that if you squeeze a lemon, it's gonna hurt real bad. So it's punishing to do so. So that's EOSP plus technically, because you're adding something to the environment, so to speak. That has now been made punishing, even though in your normal everyday actions, that would not be a punishing factor. The last one of establishing operations is EOSP minus, which is kind of a hard one to describe in examples, but let's say you're at school, you are given a token for every good deed that you do, and then you can actually redeem these tokens, should you have enough, at the student store for really cool prices. Well, let's say that you wanted this really cool toy that was 50 tokens and you were at 49, and then you just earned your 50th token. And then let's say like you're really rooting for yourself and you're like, yeah, I just got my 50th token, like everyone else can suck it, yada yada, and you start kind of gloating a little too hard, and the teacher says, okay, if you keep doing this, I'm going to take away that token. The establishing operation is you've just hit your minimum. You've just hit what you've wanted, and now the idea of it being taken away, the punishing factor, is very real. So you've just earned enough tokens to get what you want, and that makes token loss an incredibly effective punishment. So we've just established EOSP minus. That's a very limiting factor, right? We don't want to lose that point. So that's EOSP minus. Now on to the abolishing operations. AOSR plus, so abolishing operations of positive reinforcement, would be something like you've had 5 glasses of water, someone puts a 6th glass in front of you, you're okay. You don't really need it. It's as close to normalcy as you get, so to speak. AOSR plus is not really discussed too much because it's basically someone in homeostasis. It's someone who is just fine. They are not for want of anything in particular that you have. The next one is AOSR minus, which, let's go back to the sunglasses and the sun in your eyes. Let's say that you're driving, the sun hits your eyes, so ERS R minus means you pulled the visor down and you put your sunglasses on. Suddenly, the clouds come rolling in and they block the sun. Well, now you're in AOSR minus. That we've removed the need for the sun visor and for your sunglasses. So now you're going to put away your sunglasses and move the visor because we've abolished that. Once again, it's kind of like going back to homeostasis. We've abolished any need for action, so to speak. AOSP plus, remember, punishment added. So yeah, so abolishing operation of positive punishment would be something like, let's say you ate really spicy foods and your tongue kind of goes really numb, right? And you're just like, like it's already numb. There's nothing there anymore. Suddenly someone gives you another like dish that's twice as spicy. And they're like, oh, you thought you can eat that last dish. You can eat that last dish, but I bet you can't eat this one. Well, your tongue's already numb. Your mouth is already gone. Any additional spice is actually not going to be felt. So because of that numbing that you have, you're like, oh yeah, watch this. And you just start eating and you keep eating because you don't feel it. We have abolished the additional punishment there. We have removed it. So it's really just about, okay, so if you have a pain in your back and your friend says, hey, we want to go golfing. You're just like, well, all right, well, my leg kind of hurts, so I took an Advil for that. But if I go golfing too long, I'm going to have a pain in my back. But you know what? I already took an Advil. I think I'll be okay. You've abolished that punishing factor. So that punishment is no longer effective. Remember, so abolish means we decrease the value of consequence. So we've decreased the value of that back pain and possible leg pain for you to go golfing, or we've decreased the punishing value of the consequence of eating that twice as spicy dish. The last one is AOSP minus, so abolishing operation of negative punishment. Let's go back to the student store. You have 100 tokens because you have just been saving up and saving up and saving up, right? And you're kind of bragging to all your friends like, oh my gosh, like I've got all these tokens or whatever. And the teacher says, careful, you keep bragging, I'm gonna remove some. Well, the most expensive item in the student store is only 50 points. You don't really care if you lose 10, 20, even 30 points because you still have an excessive amount of points to spend at the store. So you don't really care about that punishment. That the punishment of losing your tokens is not really effective to you because you have too much already. So you're like, nah, that's okay. So we've abolished the negative punishment effect. So the value of loss of tokens has been like, nah, it's okay. I can afford to lose them. So those 8 motivating operations in accordance to their consequences are really the bread and butter. They are the main motivation operations, right? They are what establish our behaviors. They are what defines and describes the availability and also the value of the consequence, which makes a huge difference in behavior, right? There is something to be added at the end, at least of the chapter, that they did mention, which there are, beyond the 8 motivating operations according to their consequences, there are 9 human unconditioned motivation operations, or UMOs. So that is food, water, sleep, movement. So like if you're ever feeling fidgety, like human body's meant to move. Air, right? So if you're scuba diving and you realize you're running low on air, your first immediate thought isn't, oh, let's go look at those dolphins. It's more of, okay, I need to find oxygen ASAP. Temperature, which actually counts as 2 because it's both hot and cold, right? Pain and sexual activity. So those are the 9 unlearned motivating operations. And those are items that will always either establish or abolish, depending on what part of the spectrum the person is on, for whether or not they've been deprived of it or if they have been satiated with it, right? So that's the general breadth of Unit 7. I know it's a lot, and each motivating operation, they went into deeper detail on what it was, but the best way I can remember them is through those examples I provided. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you. I did my best to try and sparse them out and make them as different as possible, or if they were similar, at least understand why they were so. And I will see you in the next one.